notes. All right, so let me open my notes here. Course in Miracles. Okay, so we were on, there we go. Then open it here. Perfect. All right, so we are on, what is this? Oh, okay, there we go. I have to disconnect this. Please hold. I'm getting myself set up here. Okay. Perfect. All right. Hey, everybody. All right. So we are doing our study group, and today it is A Course in Miracles. We are on page, what page are we on? We're on page, so I'm reading A Course in Miracles, the complete and annotated edition. It isn't the traditional edition that most people are familiar with. This is actually the annotated edition, which is including all of Helen Schumann's notes. And the reason why I picked this one is because I really like knowing what's going on in someone's mind when they're doing something or when they're channeling. And she is essentially, in this book, what she's doing is she's connecting with Jesus, and she's channeling this like this version of Jesus that she is connecting with. So she's channeling that information, and they're having like a conversation in that way. And so the part of the book that I'm in is actually the page 75. It's funny, it says there's 1,946 pages, and I'm on page 75. So FYI with y'all. So that's the page that we are on. So for those of you just tuning in, this is our study group time. We are doing A Course in Miracles. If you're tuning in for a reading, that was last hour, so I won't be doing readings this hour. If you are going to ask a question, please let your question pertain to the material of the study group, not a personal reading, because I'm not going to even touch it. So just FYI with that, okay? Before I get off, I will go back over and look at the questions that y'all have asked to see if there's anything that y'all wanted me to respond to. Okay, so the part that we're on page 75 is the restoration of the altar. So I'm going to read it. It's very complicated and complex, and some of you may not understand what the hell they're talking about. I know when I first read it, I don't always know what the hell they're talking about until I reread it, and I'm like, oh, I get what they were talking about. But I'm going to break it down for y'all, okay? And I'm actually going to go back, because I spent this morning writing out all my notes. I do better when I write my notes. When I don't write my notes, it's hard for me to stick to the material as much, because then I go off on a tangent. But I spent this morning writing notes, so definitely that there, okay? All right, so I'm going to start by reading what we're talking about here. The restoration of the altar. As psychologists know, when defenses are disrupted, there is a period of real disorientation, accompanied by fear, guilt, and usually vacillation between anxiety and depression. The process discussed here is different only in that defenses are not being disrupted, but reinterpreted. Now, what they're talking about, just to kind of give you a clue in, they're talking about the processes within the mind, and what they're referring to is the differences between the human ego or personality and the godship or God or the Father, etc., the relationship between us here in physical world and us in that spiritual state. So they're talking about the different complex challenges that we have in our mind and what we deal with in this form, and how we tend to work through some of our errors in life, which are basically traumas. You can call errors traumas, or thought patterns, or mindset, or repeating cycles of struggle or suffering. So that's what they're talking about here. So if you can't follow along, that's okay. I'm going to come back and I'm going to break it down, because there's a whole lot of stuff that they were really referring to here. So the process discussed here is different only in that defenses are not being disrupted but reinterpreted, even though it may be experienced as the same thing. In the reinterpretation of defenses, they are not disrupted, but their use for attack is lost. And what they're talking about defenses is whenever people are holding to a particular mindset, and then they're kind of in a way defending that position, or they're trying to defend against anything that might interfere with that. And then vice versa, people who are focused on their lighter side or their higher being, and how sometimes we can defend that part of ourselves from this physical form, because there's a lot that kind of overlaps or that gets muddled up in all of that. In the reinterpretation of defenses, they are not disrupted, but their use for attack is lost. Since this means that they can be used only one way, they become much stronger and also much more dependable. They no longer oppose the atonement, but greatly facilitate it. The atonement can only be accepted, and the atonement in this actually means when we come to peace with something, whether it's peace with trauma, peace with our behavior, our actions, peace with our past lives, peace, coming to a place of resolution and peace within ourselves, and no longer being affected by fear or by pain or by the suffering of these prior ways of existing in a way. The atonement can only be accepted within you. You may perceive it largely as external, and this will make your experience of it minimal. You can be shown the chalice without accepting it for yourself. This is due to the improper use of the defense of externalization. Do not fail to appreciate, however, how remarkable your progress can be in this aspect. You may perceive the chalice at first as a vessel of some sort whose purpose is uncertain. Even then, however, you can notice that the inside is gold, while the outside, though shiny, is silver. This is a recognition of the fact that the inner part is more precious than the outer side, even though both are resplendent. The reinterpretation of defenses is essentially to break open the inner light. Since the separation, defenses have been used almost entirely to defend yourself against the atonement and thus maintain your separation. You generally see this as a need to protect the body from external intrusion. Fantasies about the body arise from the erroneous belief that the body can be used as a means for obtaining atonement. Perceiving the body as the temple is only the first step in correcting this kind of distortion. Seeing the body as a temple alters part of the misperception, but not all of it. It does recognize that the concept of atonement in physical terms is not appropriate, but the next step is to realize that a temple is not a building at all. Its real holiness lies in the inner altar around which the building is built. The inappropriate emphasis which people have put on beautiful church buildings is a sign of their own fear of atonement and an unwillingness to reach the altar itself. The real beauty of the temple cannot be seen with the physical eye. The spiritual eye, on the other hand, cannot see the building at all, but it perceives the altar within with perfect clarity. This is beautiful. This is because the spiritual eye has perfect vision. For perfect effectiveness, the chalice of the atonement belongs at the center of the inner altar, where it undoes the separation and restores the holiness of mind. And when they're talking about the separation, they're talking about our separation from the light, when we turned away from the light or when we came into physical form. That's the separation. That's what we call the great separation. Before the separation, the mind was invulnerable to fear because fear did not exist. Both the separation and the fear were miscreations of the mind, which have to be undone. This is what the Bible means by the restoration of the temple. It does not mean the restoration of the building, but it does mean the opening of the altar to receive atonement. This heals the separation and places within you the one defense against all errors, which can make you perfectly invulnerable. The acceptance of the atonement by everyone is only a matter of time. In fact, time and matter were made for this purpose. This appears to contradict free will because of the inevitability of the decision. If you review the idea carefully, however, you will realize that this is not true. Everything is limited in some way by the manner of its creation. Free will can temporize and is is capable of enormous procrastination, but it cannot depart entirely from its creator, who sets limits on its ability to miscreate by virtue of its own real purpose. The misuse of will engenders a situation which in the extreme becomes altogether intolerable. Pain thresholds can be high, but they are not limitless. Eventually, everybody begins to recognize, however dimly, that there must be a better way. As this recognition is more firmly established, it becomes a perceptual turning point. This ultimately reawakens the spiritual eye, simultaneously weakening the investment in physical sight. The alternating investment in the two types or levels of perception is usually experienced as conflict for a long time and can become very acute, but the outcome is as certain as God. The spiritual eye literally cannot see error and merely looks for atonement. All of the solutions which the physical eyes seek dissolve in its sight. The spiritual eye, which looks within, recognizes immediately that the altar has been defiled and needs to be repaired and protected. Perfectly aware of the right defense, it passes over all others, looking past error to truth. Because of the real strength of its vision, it pulls the will into its own service and forces the mind to concur. This reestablishes the true power of the will and makes it increasingly unable to tolerate delay. The mind then realizes with growing uncertainty that delay is only a way of increasing unnecessary pain, which it need not tolerate at all. The pain threshold drops accordingly, and the mind becomes increasingly sensitive to what it would once have regarded as very minor intrusions of discomfort. Okay, we're almost done, guys. We're almost done, and then I'm going to break it down. The children of God are entitled to perfect comfort, which comes from a sense of perfect trust. Until they achieve this, we are the children of God, by the way, so that we know what they're talking about. Until they achieve this, they will waste themselves and their true creative powers on unless attempts to make themselves more comfortable by inappropriate means. But the real means is already provided and does not involve any effort on their part at all. Their egocentricity usually misinterprets this as personally insulting, an interpretation which obviously arises from their misperception of themselves. Egocentricity and communion cannot coexist. Even the terms themselves are contradictory. The atonement is the only gift which is worthy of being offered to the altar of God. This is because of the inestimable value of the altar itself. It was created perfect and is entirely worthy of receiving perfection. God is lonely without his sons, and they are lonely without him. Remember the poem which begins, "And God stepped out on space, and he looked around and said, 'I'm lonely. I'll make me a world.' The world was a way of healing the separation, and the atonement is the guarantee that the device will ultimately do so." Okay, so some other things, something about the Course in Miracles, and especially with the one that has all of the notes, is that it dives into the material, but sometimes it refers to God in a very human way. And I can understand that because most of us don't have a personal relationship with God. Some of us do. I definitely do. But most people just show up to church on Sunday and that's their experience of God. Or some people may say a prayer or whatever and that's their experience of God. I try to experience God on a regular daily basis in everything that I do. I mean, I'm literally like a chatty Cathy when it comes to God, because God is I am God. Same as all of us. You are all God. God is you. And so for me, having like a one-off every now and then does not really serve the purpose of having a connection with God. It doesn't really serve us, and it doesn't really help us in life either. It's almost like if you have the ability to have a guidance counselor or someone that can help make sense of things, but yet you don't take advantage of that, then you just go through life and then you're asking, why does this happen? Or why is this? Or why is that? But you have the opportunity to have that guidance there directly from the source. Most people don't take advantage of that. So whenever it talks about God being lonely and stuff like that, it's talking about it from very human terms. But you cannot associate and you cannot assume that God is human, because God is not human. God is a awareness, a source. We call it source. God is source. And so that is not human. We are human. We are the physical components of God. We are the physical representation of God in this form, right? So let me go back over my notes, because I really want to talk about this, because there's a lot that this said that some of you may have completely, I have no idea what he just read, and that's okay. It's not the easiest thing to read. For those of you who follow along, great. Great. For those of you that didn't, it's okay. Let me go over it. So some of the things that were mentioned in that segment were when someone's perception of reality based in fear is released, or it is realized that it no longer serves the end goal that facilitated its sustenance, then the ideas or perspective morph into another version around the same ideals. But it can no longer be used as a weapon, and instead is used as a process for healing and recovery. In other words, when a person believes in something, whether it's an idea or when they believe in something and they build a lot of faith around that something that isn't accurate or isn't true or does not actually authentically reflect or represent or serve the individual, at some point they're going to find out. They're going to realize that what they thought or what they believed did not serve them. It can be a belief system, like a religion. It can be a behavior. It can be a pattern of behavior. It can be a belief around something. It doesn't matter what it is, but it's a belief based and that produces their behavior. So if someone believes in something and that's not true, at some point they're going to realize that through experience and through life, because life is very, very good at reflecting back the untruths of what we believe. And so it will show us what's not true, because it's going to show us what is true, what is authentic, what is accurate for us. And our world, our physical world, a matrix, it's a reality matrix. It is established in a very particular way. We all agree to it on a God level, on a soul level, and in spirit form. We just don't remember that in this human form because we forget stuff as soon as we're born. But it is established to be the way it is. So when someone's perception of reality, based in fear, if they behave the way they do, if they believe the world operates the way it does, or they believe things are this way, if it's based out of fear or out of these lower vibratory states, these very painful states of suffering, at some point they're going to hit a wall with that. At some point they're going to hit a brick wall, because it's not going to be supported by the matrix, by the reality matrix, by our world. It will not be supported by it. At that point, they have a decision to make, because at that point, the universe is giving them an opportunity to heal from this pain, from the thing they believed in that continues to produce suffering and pain for them. If you believe that the world is full of hateful people and it's only hateful people, you will only experience hateful people. And then at some point, you're going to encounter someone who is not a hateful person. They're a loving person, a compassionate person. At that point, the reality of life has shown you something that goes against your chosen perception. And your perception either will change to accommodate that new reality, or you will begin to question everything within you. And it can begin the process of healing and overcoming those limiting beliefs, those limiting perspectives. Or you can stick to the pain, hold on to it, and double down, which some people just tend to double down, and then they screw themselves double. So you have a choice to make. And that's what this is talking about, is that when you are faced with a reality that goes against your accepted reality, you can choose to evolve and grow from that. You can choose to adjust the reality so that it makes room for that, or you can double down. But if you double down, and if you don't budge very much and you just make enough room in your reality to accept that, you're still going to suffer. You're still going to experience suffering. You're still going to experience pain. You're still going to be very attached to those states that are not going to serve you. And at that point, you will experience more of it. You'll perpetuate the cycle. And then you wonder why you're suffering, why you're in pain, why this is not changing, because you're holding on to the things that keep you attached to that. That's why. So another thing that I mentioned was healing can only occur as a byproduct of the individual going within instead of going without, because previous perspectives did not lead to the end goal. The individual supporting it has the opportunity to internalize their focus and reassess their own perception of reality. How often do people, as soon as something goes wrong, instead of internalizing or going within, they automatically go without. They automatically look at everything around them and then start blaming everything around them. I blame this person, I blame that person, I blame my circumstances, I blame my being poor, I blame society. They blame everything else and they never go within. That is an externalization of someone's suffering. They are not trying to understand what's at the core of their suffering, and instead they only acknowledge or see the externalization of it. They blame the circumstance or the person or the condition. So that's not the best way to deal with suffering. Granted, if you're in the middle of a ship sinking, you're gonna have to deal with the reality of being human, which is, oh shit, this ship is sinking. I'm gonna go down with the ship. I need to get off the ship. I need to put on a life vest, whatever. That's an immediate human response. We're not talking about that. We're talking about, once that's happened, blaming the ocean, blaming the ship, blaming, the maker of the ship, blaming this, blaming that, instead of acknowledging that we may have also been a part of that or contributed to the circumstance or the situation. And so people would say, well, how am I supposed to blame myself for a ship sinking? Well, maybe if you were aware enough, you might have received some insight, some intuition that maybe was trying to get you to go in a different direction, or to change your plans, or to move the date, etc. That sometimes occurs. And if you go against that and don't listen to that, and you keep going forward with what you intended, then you put yourself on that ship, right? Same thing. If you are on the ship and you chose to go with a cheaper option than the one that was more expensive because you wanted to save money, that's a decision that you made in that moment that could have changed everything, right? So it comes down to the little things. But even the bigger events that happen without us intentionally forcing or causing, it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, you had this experience, this thing happened. Do you externalize all of your suffering and find the external causes of it and only stick to that? Or do you go within and try to find a way to come to peace within yourself about that event, about that situation? And so that's what this is talking about. Healing can only occur as a byproduct of the individual going within. You're only going to be able to heal from something if you go within and you begin to address what is happening within you. Because it doesn't matter what's happened on the outside, at the end of the day, the healing happens within you. And you can try to wait till everything is perfect in this world for you to feel better, but newsflash, nothing will ever be perfect in this world, because it's exactly as it should be. So what is the other decision? Go within, or become the eternal victim and blame everything no matter what, and assume that the only way things could get better is if something was perfect on the outside. So externalizing the error is disassociating from the personal accountability. Internalizing brings about the opportunity for change in mechanisms that lead to the embracing of the responsible error. So in other words, going without isn't going to resolve an error or resolve your thinking about stuff or resolve how you lined up with stuff. You have to go within. You have to internalize. You have to go in and really examine yourself. What's going on in your head? What's happening there? A few years ago, several years ago, I every day would go, driving to the park to go for my jog. And every day I would go jogging, I would have this flash in my mind that was basically me getting into a car wreck. And I would no, I can't think about that. I can't think about that because I don't want that to happen, right? Because that's the law of attraction. If you think about something, it's going to happen. Not necessarily, but I always kept having these flashes there. And so I would try to no, let me pull that desire. Let me pull that intention back in. Let me pull that in. I don't want to manifest that. I don't want to think about that. But that was insight, that was intuition. That wasn't me manifesting it. That was me being told, hey, this might be coming up for you. You need to be cautious. And it always internally in my mind was around the same spot on the freeway. And so that didn't stop me from driving down that spot on the freeway. I still drove down that spot on the freeway. So lo and behold, a few months later, after I started having those flashes, sure enough, I get into a car wreck in that spot on the freeway because there was a pileup of vehicles and I was a part of this pileup. I was the last vehicle in the pileup. So that's essentially, I could have blamed the pileup. I could have blamed the freeway. I could have blamed the person that I ran into. Could have done all that other stuff. But at the end of the day, I was receiving insight and I didn't acknowledge that. And I instead just chose to ignore it. That was my accountability. I was responsible for that. So a lot of lessons learned in paying attention to my intuition and making sure that I don't dismiss anything. And if it's an obsessive thought, definitely don't dismiss it because there's something to it that you might not be fully aware of. And that actually helped me to correct the error of when I have some repetitive thought show up in my mind, dismissing it. That's the error. Now I don't dismiss things. If I have a thought come into my mind and then it sticks for a while, I know that I need to pay attention to it. And I pay attention to it and I act on it. Even if it sounds crazy or it seems irrational, I still act on it. And so that was me addressing the error and assuming that there's a teaching in it for me, which is the teaching is learning how to pay attention to my intuition, following my intuition, embracing my intuition, trusting myself, trusting that I'm being guided, that I'm being given this information, this awareness, this knowledge. In the process of re-examining the internal in comparison to the external, it becomes clear that finding fault or seeking salvation of suffering externally is of less value than to seek it internally. Placing more worth in external relief does not match the superior value of internal healing and salvation. How many people are waiting for Jesus to show up and say, hey, y'all, I'm back? Like, how many people are waiting? Because they've been waiting for almost 2,000 years. And in the time of Christ, when Christ was around, told people to go within. Look within, go within, fix your crap, pretty much. Don't stop thinking that others are going to fix things for you. Take accountability, take responsibility for yourself, and fix your own crap. And that's pretty much what we're told in so many words. But people, of course, was like, oh my gosh, Jesus is going to save us all. Jesus is here, everybody. Jesus is going to save us all. And now we have people who've been waiting around for 2,000 years for someone who essentially was teaching them to save themselves. And instead, they're waiting for this person to show back up to save them because they do not take personal accountability for their own lives or for their own misdoings. If you lived a life that is not befitting of honor, don't wait for Christ to come and fix your crap. Don't wait for Jesus or for God to step in and say, hey, you've been suffering and you've made a lot of mistakes. But if you say this one prayer, I'm going to come in and I'm going to fix it all. No, you need to be accountable for your own crap. That's what we've been told, and that's what we're being guided to. We need to take accountability for ourselves. We can't make God responsible for our own errors and issues. We can't make people responsible for our own errors and issues. We are responsible for our own errors and issues. And if we're waiting for someone to save us, then we need to stop with that nonsense and we need to go within and actually start to examine ourselves, judge ourselves, look at ourselves. Why are we being this way? Why are we acting this way? Why are we thinking this way? Is it leading to the life that I desire for myself, or is it standing in the way of it? And if it's standing in the way of it, which is a majority of the population, then begin to go within and address these issues within yourself, slowly but surely. And if you ask for help and support, the universe will bring you the understanding so that you can address these things. People will show up in your life. You will be guided. Books will be given to you. Things may show up in conversations you're having. It will show up, but you must acknowledge your hand and your role in all of it. In the process of self-examination and turning inward, it is immediately assumed that this inward process includes the body. The body then becomes emphasized and can be interpreted as a representation of inner beingness. But this is still a distortion. But this is a first layer of introspection. And the body, though a temple, is not the aspect of oneself that is requiring of healing, peace, and of atonement. The minute that most people have their awakening, they immediately try to fix their body. because they're like, oh, I must live wholesome. I must be wholesome. I must be a vegan. I must do yoga. I must do these things that are spiritual things. And then by doing that, I am aligning. No. I know of plenty of people who do not take care of their bodies, could give a rat's ass, but they live so in form with spirit. They live with God in everything they do. They are the kindest, most compassionate, most aware people that I know. They just happen to like a hot dog for dinner. So they're not perfect people by any means, but people who become overly fixated with the body and being pure, I have to purify myself. I have to purify myself. And so the best way to purify myself is to make my body perfect, to become a perfect vegan, to become a perfect body. No, that is a surface level way of atonement, of elevating yourself, of embracing your awakening. You can do it. These practices can serve a person. They can definitely serve you. But eating a cheeseburger didn't stop me from being psychic or being a medium or having a spiritual perspective and understanding of things. It didn't stop me. I eat what I want, honestly. I eat what I want. Granted, I try to eat more vegan because I think that this world, we need to just have we need to have less animal products, and we need to have a world where it's sustainable. And having a bunch of cattle being killed and slaughtered and also having them produce so much methane and stuff is probably not a sustainable situation for all of us. But that's besides the point. I don't have to be perfect physically to align to my highest spiritual calling or my highest spiritual self, and neither do you. So don't feel like you have to be this perfect version of what people think spirituality or being awakened means, because it has nothing to do with the body. The body is just a physical tool that we used in our lives to have a life, to experience our unique perspective, our individuation as self. So don't be so consumed with the body. And typically when we're like, oh, if I feel great physically, if I just cleanse my body of all the toxicity, if I just purify myself, then I will be in the zone and I will be, awakened. No, because it has nothing to do with the physical body. The physical body is just a physical body. It's just a tool. Okay. So don't be so obsessed with the physical body, because the physical body isn't really going to get you any closer to having a true, authentic spiritual connection of the highest degree with Source and with the rest of us, which we are a source. The inner being, spiritual being within all of us, is the altar to atonement. Fixating on the body and physical health is like obsessing over the church building when the work to be done, atonement and remembrance, occurs within and through the practices and mechanisms of being. In other words, if you're going to go to church, you don't care. It doesn't matter what building it is, as long as the practices within the building are allowing you to have the closest connection with Source and understand yourself in its truest form. So it doesn't matter what building you're in. So when we become obsessed with the body and we're trying to purify this or be perfect in that, we become too fixated on the building and less concerned with what's happening inside of the building. And that's the more important component. That's the more important part. So I don't give a damn if the outside of the church needs a paint job. If I go within and I am able to connect and to feel that unity with Source in form with all of us, with all of you, that's more important. Doesn't matter if the building needs a paint job. In heavenly being, fear does not exist. So in our heavenly being state, in our spiritual state, in our soul state, in our Source state, when we are no longer in physical form, in our physical bodies, when we are deceased, okay, put it that way. When we are in that state, in that spirit state, in heavenly being, fear does not exist. We have no fear in that state, because fear is a byproduct of the illusion of life. And life is an illusion. Life is a play. Life is a reality produced to create all of these opportunities for us to understand. And so when we are in that heavenly state, fear does not exist. We were invulnerable to the suffering of fear. We could not be touched by fear. We were not vulnerable to being affected by fear. It is a miscreation of mind that is produced in human form solely. So we only produce fear. We only experience fear in this form, in this reality. Doesn't exist in the other one. So miscreation of mind that is produced in human form solely. The idea of restoring the temple does not mean a physical temple, but the spiritual one. So restoring the temple or associating with our truest form is not about the body. It's about the being within the body. That's why it's important to go within, because you cannot understand who you truly are unless you take a little time to examine yourself and pay attention to what is happening within you. Not by your thoughts, but by your state of being. And most people have a state of being based in fear, based in worry over their bills, based in worry over a relationship, based in worry over their children, based in worry over this or that, their job. So they're more focused on that, which is a fear-based reality. All things have an expiration date in this form. So everything in life has an expiration date. Nothing here is permanent. Nothing will last. And to even think that we could make anything permanent or make something last goes against the model of creation. Nothing was designed to exist forever. It was designed to reflect a form and an energy and a beingness, but it's not designed to sustain that or stay that way. So nothing in physical form is going to last forever. So all things have an expiration date in this form. All things are designed to expire, to remind and offer the opportunity for evolved perception of what is real and what is not. The reason why we encounter so much transience and so much temporalness of things is because it is a constant reminder that nothing here is real and nothing here is solid and permanent. And we are not solid and permanent. We have the ability to change. Everything is changing. And so that is something that's built in, a reminder that this isn't going to last forever, so don't expect it to. All things are designed to expire, to remind and offer the opportunity for evolved perception of what is real and what is not. What is sustained and understood within does not expire, but evolves and is affirmed or discredited by its basis in fear. So what we think is permanent, what we think is solid, what we think is unchangeable, at some point, something will happen that shows us the opposite. Something will happen that reminds us, sorry, not going to happen. Only the heavenly state is eternal. Human circumstance is not eternal, and any attempt to hold such a permanent produces further suffering. Happiness and experience of the heavenly state is not based in circumstance, but instead in a product of being. So let me go over those two again. I learned this personally when I was at Starbucks because, back when I used to work at Starbucks, we would have new people come in and be a part of the team. I started off with a team that was already established, and I became very good friends with all of my coworkers. New people come in, we became very good friends. And it always broke my heart when people had to move on, right? Because people move on, people graduate, or people go to a better job, people move up in a position. Things are always changing. So there's nothing ever that stays permanent or stays the same for too long. And it was very heartbreaking for me because I wasn't used to people going in and out of my life like that. I was used to people being there for a while or for a period of time. And as time went on, I got used to it. And I said, you know what? Like, nothing's ever permanent. Things are always going to be changing. So even though I would go to a new store or transfer to a new location or make new friends, I knew that there was a expiration date for that connection or that experience. And I acknowledged and accepted that just is the way that it was. And so I enjoyed it for what it was, but I didn't become overly attached to those connections, to those circumstances, to my store or the location of the customers, because it was always going to change. And we have a habit, you and I, we have a habit of becoming overly attached to our loved ones, the people in our lives, even though they're family, etc. We always think that people are going to be around forever, that things will stay the same forever, that our lives will stay the same forever, that our homes will stay the same forever. And that's not the case. Things are always going to change. And so when you accept that reality, there is a appreciation for what is, but there isn't an over-attachment to what is. Granted, there are things that we still miss to this day or we still feel a connection to, but they're not here anymore. And so we have no choice but to let go of those things, unless you become one of those people where you don't ever let go of things and you become a hoarder and you're constantly trying to make up for what's being taken away or what's not staying permanent in your life by accumulating, or trying to hold a relationship for longer than it needs to be held, trying to force a relationship to stay when it's no longer serving you, trying to force a friendship that no longer serves you, trying to force a job to be the same when it no longer serves you. nothing is designed to be permanent. So for you to think that you can go through this life with a sense of something being permanent, you need to drop that, because you're setting yourself up for heartbreak if you do not accept the inevitability that things will not stay the same. And so happiness and experience of the heavenly state is not based in circumstance, but instead a product of being. People do not understand this, and it is an ongoing repeating theme by every single master, every spiritual master, every religious master. Happiness, joy, those states are not produced by our circumstances. If you're waiting for life to be perfect so you can be happy, you will never be happy. If you're waiting for a relationship to exist to be happy, you will never be happy when the relationship shows up. You might have a little bit of that. You might experience something great, but that's not going to be the basis of your happiness. If you are expecting a relationship or friendship, a job to be perfect, to be happy, you'll never be happy. So if you're waiting for circumstances to be a certain way to be happy, give it up, because you will be waiting for the rest of your life. And if you experience happiness for a few moments in those encounters, it will not be permanent and it will not last for the majority of your life. Happiness is a state of mind. It's a state of being. It is not a condition, a byproduct of condition. So your circumstances, your conditions in life do not produce happiness. They can make it easier to experience happiness, but happiness exists within us. It is always there. It is always available to us. But for those of us who do not understand that and who do not even realize we can just grab it and bring it up within us, we will forever be seeking it outside of ourselves. If I just have this much money, if I just get my debt paid off, I'll be happy. No, never going to happen. And I can tell you this, I learned this the hard way, because I always had this idea, if I just got into a relationship, I'll be happy. I got into a relationship, it's a sustainable one, didn't produce my happiness. I enjoy my relationship, I appreciate it, but the happiness was within me. Once I got my debt paid off, or I got to a good financial place, then I would be happy. I got my debt paid off and I got to a good financial place. It was easier to enjoy happiness, or easier to not worry, but it didn't produce long enduring happiness for me. Happiness had to start within me, because it ultimately didn't lead to anything. So I'm telling you from experience, not just because it sounds good on paper, but because I personally had to go through this myself in my own experiences. So happiness is not part of your circumstances or produced from your circumstances. It can make you think it is, because it's nice to have an experience that brings up exhilaration or brings up these sensations within us. But those are superficial forms of happiness. They are not long forms of happiness, enduring forms of happiness. If consistent effort is applied to hold the physicality of life in permanent form, there will come a time after much heartbreak and suffering that a perceptual change occurs out of choice and need, awareness and desire for less suffering to seek what is permanent. What can be held in place regardless of circumstances, that being the internal mechanisms and state of being of an individual. In other words, at some point, when we've tried so hard to hold something in permanent form, we believe that it will produce happiness. And when it doesn't, at that point, we have to do a little bit of soul searching, and we have to figure some things out, because if we're still not happy, and something is working the way it's supposed to, then that means that it was never the basis of happiness to begin with. And at some point, it will force us to reassess and to start to shift our perspective. And in the shifting of that perspective, and in the acknowledging of our discontent, we begin to examine where happiness is, and we start to dig a little deeper. And that's what this is talking about. Because at some point we just get tired of suffering. We get tired of suffering, or not being happy, or being discontent, or whatever. And once we get tired enough, we're either going to keep trying to change the circumstances outside of ourselves, which hasn't led to anything, or we start to go within and we start to figure out some things and start to try to understand some things. You know, for me, happiness came about when I learned to release and let go of a lot of things that I had held on to for many years of my life. Happiness automatically came up within me when I focused on just like the now, and like the things that I enjoy every single day, that are the little instances and the little moments, the little experiences that I have. Happiness is like a little part of all of it. So it's almost like, instead of having this one bomb of happiness blow up in my life, I have little pops of happiness here and there, just by me experiencing things in a unique way, just by me being aware and being present in my life. Just by me right now, I'm happy doing this with you guys. Like, I feel so happy. And even though I'm not smiling, like, and even though that doesn't mean that that's happy. That's just like, it's an emotional reaction. But I love what is happening right now and connecting with you guys in this way, because for me, it is happiness. It is bringing up a lot of this depth of connection and of loving beingness with you. And that's not something that I can get from, having like 100 extra bucks. Like, that's just money and resources. This is really not going to do anything for me. Using our free will and manifesting ability to sustain anything permanently can only produce a kind of procrastination for the atonement of the individual. By design, all things must end. So if you keep trying to make things permanent in your life, you're only delaying the inevitable. You're just pushing things off, delaying and you're just going to waste time at that point. You waste a lot of time trying to be happy. One can attain levels of happiness or the heavenly state through physicality, which will always be temporary, or spirituality, which requires a relationship and a sustainable set of mechanisms within self in being. Spirituality is permanent and ever evolving. Physicality is not. So let me read that again, because my brain wandered off. I'm like, what did I write here? One can attain levels of happiness or heavenly state through physicality, which we've already talked about that, which will always be temporary. Or spirituality, which requires a relationship and sustainable set of mechanisms within self in being, which means we can experience happiness within ourselves by working through processes and mechanisms in our mind that allow us to consistently return to a state of happiness no matter what we're going through in life. And I use myself as an example. I always have to use myself as an example because I don't want to be here spewing all of this and I have no experience to speak of. You have to have experience to speak of if you are going to consider yourself a spiritual master. So when last year, for example, last year was a difficult year for most people, in fact, and it was very easy to be unhappy last year, to blame this and to blame that, these external things, which, a lot of us did, including myself. But at the end of the day, once the trauma has stopped, once the event has stopped and ceased, are you going to exist there? Are you going to exist in that state of perpetual recycling of that experience and all that it produced within you? Or are you going to say, okay, I've just gone through that. I am going to do what I can to address it in the best way possible. If I can contribute to resolving that from a physical standpoint, from a physicality, from this world standpoint, I'll do whatever I need to do with that. But every day, I'm not going to spend every moment thinking or obsessing about that. I need to reconnect to that sense of beingness that exists within me that is based in love and happiness and joy. And that's been my state of being for a long time. So for me, as soon as the trauma ended and I was able to, okay, I no longer need to have my hand on the wheel, on the steering wheel, because things are now momentarily moving in the direction that they need to. So I don't need to be concerned with the physicality, the physical event. Where do I need to go? What do I need to do now? Well, I don't want to keep perpetuating the cycle of anger and rage or whatever. I need to reconnect with my deepest self and resume what is natural for me, which is a state of well-beingness. And that's what I did. I got back into my own state. I took a little bit of a time out from people. I stopped doing my podcast for a couple months because I needed to reconnect with that part of me that exists no matter what. And I did, and I was able to do that because that's my core being. That's my resting state of being. And we can maintain that resting state of being. It can be a constant part of us if we will just work on it and we will practice what that feels like for each of us individually. One can attain levels of... Wait, did I say that? Yeah, I already said that. An awakening. A lot of people do not understand what an awakening is. A lot of people think that, oh, if I just know that there's the spiritual world, I'm awakened. Nope, that's not being awakened. If I just realize that we are all going to the fifth dimension or the sixth dimension or whatever, I'm awakened. No, that doesn't mean you're awakened. If I just saw a bunch of conspiracy theories, films on YouTube or this or that, it means that I'm woke, that I'm awakened. No, that is not awakening. Awakening is an internal mechanism, an internal process that we go through when we realize in the moment of our lives that all of this is not all that there is. There is more than this. And what is it? What is more than this? What are we truly besides our physical bodies? What are you truly besides this other person staring back at me? What are you? What am I truly, authentically? What is this? And I know there's more. And I know that there is much more profound awareness and beingness than I currently understand. And I desire to evolve into that and to grow into that and to explore that. That is an awakening, because at that point you've come to a basic tenet of being woke, which is you understand and acknowledge that the world we live in is not all that there is, and there's much more. You may not know the answer to that, but you feel it, you know it, and you desire, and you even allow yourself to ask the questions, to ask the universe, to discover what is beyond this state. That is a state of awakening. And there's a detachment that begins to occur in one's life when that occurs. I went through this a couple of times, actually. I went through several awakenings, but my very first awakening was when I came to that realization. There's more to life than this. And I'm not who I think I am. There's more to me than this as well. And we've all been living in like this illusion that this is the real thing and that's it. And it isn't. So when I became awakened, my very first time, I became very detached and disassociated from my life, from people, from friendships, from connections, from the interests in school. I just really didn't care about school. Nothing really mattered to me or was that interesting because it just felt very trivial. It felt very like, well, that's just dumb, like in comparison to like the reality of what is. And so it transforms a person, and you can actually get lost in all of that because if you're not careful, there's a balance that has to happen at that point. And if you don't evolve into a balance, you'll become one of two extremes at that point. And I'm going to go into that right now. So an awakening of the spiritual self automatically reduces the need, desire, and value of the physical. What is physically valued and important no longer seems to be so. There's a detachment that occurs in that things which felt important no longer seem as important. A gravitational tug-of-war occurs with the physicality, the earthly matters, concerns, and struggles, our human self, and summoning from us, meaning we're constantly being pulled to focus on that, because stuff happens, right? When we think we're woke and we start to question everything, all of a sudden we still have issues in life that come up, and we're constantly dragged back in, we're pulled back in, we're sucked back into the human drama. So there's a tug of war that starts to take place between the human drama. A gravitational tug of war occurs with physicality, summoning from you more energy to sustain and reinforce the spiritual simultaneously summon you within you what is real and of actual value. So the spiritual version of you, the higher version of you, knowing its true authentic self, but still trying to understand it, pulling and summoning you to kind of fix it on that, to kind of propel you into discovering self-discovery. So there's this tug of war that starts to happen between a physical human mind, perspective, ego, etc., and the spiritual version of us. The balance between the two takes years to achieve, and I know this from experience. It doesn't happen overnight. Just because you woke yesterday doesn't mean that you're good to go and you can jump on the next train to Happy Land, because it doesn't happen that way. There's a lot of work that goes into this. Spiritual work and spiritual discovery and awakening it's like a job. It really is, because at that point you are going to start to expand beyond your physical body, beyond your physical self. You start to expand in mind and in consciousness. And it desires to understand more by reaching out. And it reaches out to the people outside of us. It reaches out to the resources. It reaches out to the experiences, etc. So if the balance between the two takes years to achieve, if you attach solely to the physicality, then the internal mind mechanisms will associate overimportance to matters and conditions of life, and a tendency of intellectualization of all things, and becomes affirmed. In other words, and this reminds me of like the Vulcans from Star Trek. They're more concerned with logic. So essentially, they completely there's an assumption that your emotions, your human experience has no value, and that only the spiritual has value. And so some people, they go to an extreme of being intellectuals. They focus on being intellectuals about everything. They become basically super smart asses about everything spirituality wise. So they know everything. They know everything. They've read everything. They understand spirituality, but they have not properly incorporated that. They haven't properly integrated that into themselves. So they only focus on what's mentally good for them, what's focused on the mentality of things. So they become very mental in that way. If the spirituality of being becomes primary, then the spiritualized of all things occurs, with the over-association of all experiences and creations being spiritualized. An abandoning of earthly norms, perspectives, and engagements becomes rooted and affirmed within all mental mechanisms. Personalized contemporary shamanism and Buddhism becomes a part of that situation. So you either go from being a super intellectual and only focusing on like the stuff intellectually without really experiencing the rest of your human nature, or you become this person that is obsessed with anything spiritual. And so whatever you read, whatever you do, somehow has to fit within this mindset of spirituality. Oh, the physical body and all of this other stuff. Oh, and so this is where you start to get into a different direction, because instead of being a smartass and trying to factually have everything make sense or be, idealized, what you end up happening is you end up having people who essentially believe in anything and everything as long as it seems spiritual. And so there's no real basis of reality there. They buy into this alternative reality that is spiritual, and they stick with that no matter what happens. And so they don't concern themselves with human experiences. They don't concern themselves with things of this world. They just try to disassociate themselves as well. And so those are the two extremes that tend to occur as soon as someone becomes awakened. I know people who are in both categories. I know people who are super intellectuals, but do not really connect with the human emotion and perspective and honor it because it serves us. We're here in human form for a reason. If we weren't supposed to be here in this form, then we wouldn't be. We're here for a reason. It serves a purpose. And to ignore it, to disassociate from it, to say, I don't want to have nothing to do with being human. I'm going to be an intellectual. I'm going to focus on what's ideally the best. And I'm going to judge everything based on that and the intelligence that I hold and what I hold in these ideas and these thoughts. You've just completely cut off half of the reason why you exist in this form. The opposite is true as well. If you only live in this fantasy land of spirituality, that everything is spiritually based. Oh, well, the reason why she probably doesn't like that guy is because her chakra's red. What the hell does that have to do with her direct experience with that human being and their emotional connection? What the hell does a red chakra have to do with it? You can say, oh, well, the chakra, this, that's what I'm talking about. Overemphasizing, becoming obsessed with spiritual things that do not necessarily benefit or help or aid the human experience. They may help us understand things from a spiritual perspective. They may give us an understanding from a spiritual awareness and energy awareness, but it's still, at the end of the day, we're still in a physical body. We're still humans. And I'm not going to fault a misaligned chakra, throat chakra, and blame that for not opening my mouth and standing up for myself. Oh, well, my chakra is closed. That's why I can't talk to people. No, you don't want to talk to people. That's why your chakra is closed. Don't reverse it in its form. You need to stick with what you're responsible for. And those are representations and reflections of what you are. They're not responsible for what you are. And I think people have that all confused. They blame spirituality for their conditions and their issues. Blame yourself, and your spirituality represents those issues. That's how it should work. And so that they become extremes in that. So I know people where when coronavirus was just a new thing, they were like, oh, well, I just said a prayer and I'm protected and I'm good to go. No, this is a human condition in a very human experience from a human perspective in a human world we all agree to operate within. And so you're just as susceptible to this as I am, except you choose to believe that what you hold in your mind is going to keep you from having a human experience. You're going to have a human experience whether you want it or not, because you're here to have a human experience. But take steps to address the humanness, the human reality that we live in, and then go into your spirituality. You still have to be human, though. At the end of the day, you still have to be human. And those individuals I saw, it's funny because you have the intellectuals who cannot even feel for the people who are suffering or struggling. Oh, that's their fault. They're responsible. Oh, they're unhealthy, so that's why they got the virus. And so they're very much like, well, I'm better than you because I'm smarter or I know more, and so I'm over here. You've got the other people. Oh, well, some of us won't be affected. Some of us are saved because we're spiritual. Some of us are this, or some of us are that. Again, latching on to pure spirituality, completely disconnecting from the human nature, and then not embracing the reason why we're here. And to some extent, and I will say this, I love Buddhism. I love the practices that Buddhism teaches. At the same time, one of my biggest issues with Buddhism is that it asks you in some ways to no longer have desire, because by having desire, it leads to suffering. And I don't believe that. I don't believe that we need to completely cut ourselves off from appreciating and embracing the ability to have a human life, and cutting ourselves off from that. I don't agree with that. I think that we're here for a reason. We shouldn't turn away from that and then go off and live in a mountain somewhere, or just detach ourselves from reality because we want to live in a bubble that is completely climate controlled or, emotionally controlled. That's not really going to help you in this life either. So it just depends on how you want to look at it. I believe in the balance. You need to hold a balance between the two. It's okay to be human. It's okay to express your spirituality. It's okay to be a smartass sometimes because you know more, but at the end of the day, you're still human, and every single human being has to take a shit and wipe their ass on a regular basis. You're never going to escape that reality because it is part of the human condition of suffering. So it is what it is, peeps. There's nothing we can do to change that. So when you become awakened, it really becomes difficult because we can immediately, by becoming awakened, we can become part of those extremes. And you have to really work to have a balance. And I know because I've gone through both of those extremes and I've operated from both of those extremes. The first place I went to was that intellectualizing of everything. And then at some point when I hit a really, really rough relationship, it woke my ass up from that. And I was like, nope, that's not going to work. I'm not going to be able to hold on to that. So then I went to the opposite. I went to the other extreme. Everything is spiritual. Everything is spiritual. Everything is spiritual. That did not serve me either. It wasn't until I embraced who I was, why I'm here, what we're all here to experience, that I was able to find a balance that worked for me. And I honestly believe that that has led to me being able to get up every morning, do the work that I do, deal with the reality of life, still have love for everyone and all of you and for myself as well, and continue forward until my time in this form is done. And so that allows me to move forward in an authentic and accurate and wholesome faith. And that's what I call it, wholesome faith. The spiritual self reaches consistently for atonement and refuses to assume error, peace, happiness, communion with Source. So again, the spiritual self reaches consistently for atonement. The spiritual nature, our spiritual being, is constantly trying to help us heal and recover from the traumas of this world. And it is trying to remind us consistently of what we truly are and what is available to us in our heavenly form that we can also access in this form in some way at times. And so it's constantly reminding us of what we truly authentically are. This pulls the physical self into assuming or associating all things in service to the spiritual self. That's when you have the extreme, because we start to base everything around spirituality and it becomes an obsession. This is why we get people who are overly religious, because the religious beliefs or the religion represents their spiritual nature, because they can't fathom being above that or being beyond that. They have to align and stick within that box, which limits their ability to experience the grander versions of themselves, because it is still a religion is a byproduct of man trying to make sense of God and our connection in the universe and our existence in the universe. Unfortunately, it's a limited perspective of our relationship with God and of the universe. So you can't use that as the only go-to, because it's not really going to do you the favors and help you to sustain this life wholesomely or fully. Some people are able to do that, but majority of people at some point, they're going to have a crisis of faith, because the faith does not allow for them to have experiences that go against what is represented in the book. So the spiritual self reaches consistently for atonement and refuses to assume error. This pulls the physical self into assuming or associating all things in service to the spiritual self. The matrix, or physical world as we call it, conforms to the perception of the spiritual self in the disassociation with form. This is a tricky occurrence as the spiritual self can still be influenced by the physical self. If proper atonement is not achieved and instead a superficial form of atonement is accepted without examination or assessment. Too much is assumed and not enough fully understood. This could give rise to an alternate physical self which is assumed based in the spiritual self. This is about people who read something spiritual and automatically assume that they are that thing that they've read without having proper integration or experience to support that. So you have all these people walking around who pretend to be spiritual, act spiritual, but when you ask them to give you an example, use it in a sentence, and that's my line. Okay, if this is what you said, use it in a sentence. Give me an example. If there's no example, you have absolutely no idea what you're talking about because you have nothing to integrate that awareness or that teaching or that understanding within you. And so you've got people walking around assuming that they are the highest version of their spiritual selves, whether it's a religious person, whether it's like a Christian. And born again Christians are the worst with this because the minute that they've been blessed and born again, they think they got it all down and they're perfectly representations of spirituality. They're not, because they haven't had the experience to support and to integrate the lessons of Christianity. And instead they're focused on this idea that they're the better version, or that's the same thing. And I remember that because I've gotten into conversations with family over this. So just because you call yourself a thing or you've read something doesn't mean that you understand it or that you are able to even express it in any accurate depiction of way through your experiences or through your life's choices. So you're not something unless you experience it. And so that's why we're here. We're here to experience creation so that we know ourselves as source in form. The integration of the spiritual self takes time and experience to occur properly. A rush to integration and refusal to await full understanding leads to fractal perception of the spiritual self and introduces errors of being that are not based in communion with source, but instead produce the production of further physicality in service of source without the experience of the spiritual self. In other words, when you begin to force a spiritual growth or force yourself to grow or evolve spiritually without the proper time or experience to integrate the understandings properly into yourself and into your life, then what happens is people start to actually they become physical again, they become superficial, and they focus on things. This is when you think of people who practice Wicca or ritualistic work, etc. When you understand that you do not need a thing to express and expand and to affirm who you are in this creation, you start to lean on things to fill in the gap. And so people buy into crystals, buy into cards, I'm not saying that these tools cannot serve you or that these can't be beneficial, because you're putting your power in these things. So they represent some aspect of yourself, but you've put your power into things, which means you've given up your power. I don't need crystals to do the work that I do. I don't need the Buddha in the back to do the work that I do. I don't need this. I don't need that. I don't need cards. I don't need the things that most people think they need to do the work that I do, because I know myself and who I am in my core, and I know the reality of my being. So I don't need anything, and none of us need anything. But when we are buying into a spiritual idea and we haven't properly integrated it and understand it fully in the depths of our being, we tend to lean on things to fill in the gap. Well, if I just have the right crystal. I had a conversation a few days ago with a client, and she spent $6,000 on a crystal, because for her, it was supposed to bring about transformation and change and positivity in her life, happiness. And I'm like, why are you spending, in my mind, I'm like, why are you spending that on that? Why don't you give yourself a $6,000 trip to go and get away and go somewhere where you can kind of spend a little alone time, or you can go and have an experience that might be very fulfilling for you. Why are you depending on something physical to do this for you? And so for me, it's like, no, like this is what I'm talking about. You're trying to use something physical to make up for the lack of integration of the spiritual understanding and knowledge. Doesn't mean that she doesn't know what the hell she's doing, but she's bought into the idea that she needs something. She doesn't. All of the power that she has is within her. Same thing with you. You do not need things to fulfill your power as source, as God in form. You have it within you, and you call it and summon it up every single time you bring up love within you. Every single time you see your connection to all of life. Every single time you are in awe of this world and of the universe. You call that beingness within you, and you can use it to create a reality. You can use that power and understanding to create and manifest a reality of your desires. Now, that's the tricky part, and that's a completely different conversation that we'll get into at some other point. So again, let me go back to what I just said, and then I'm going to finish it off here, and then I got to go over because I'm running out of time here. The integration of the spiritual self takes time and experience to occur properly. A rush to integration and refusal to await full understanding leads to fractal perceptions, meaning you break up your perceiving of things and you reduce its ability to give you insight of the spiritual self, and introduce errors of being that are not based in communion with source, but instead production of the further physicality in service of source without the experience of the spiritual self. Ego self and spiritual communion cannot coexist. What this is saying is that you're either the individuation of your form, which is I'm either Ferny, or I'm the highest form of myself. But I can't occupy both within me simultaneously. So when I'm expressing something, I'm either expressing this ego version, this Ferny version, or this higher aware, higher beingness version of who I am and who we all are. But I cannot do both at the same time, because they, at some point, if I stick and focus more so on my beingness, on Ferny, on my ego, that takes over. And it is all about protecting Ferny. It's all about being Ferny. It's all about expressing Ferniness. But if I am in my higher form and my higher beingness, then I am able to connect with other aspects of myself in grander form that I cannot in my ego self. So there's a huge difference between the two. Doesn't mean you can't have a balance. And this is not saying you can't have a balance between the two. It just means you can't do both at the same time. You're either going to be this ego version of yourself, or you're going to be this higher version of yourself. Find a balance, build a balance, establish a balance after an awakening, but you can't just be one or the other. You can't be this high version of yourself, because you still have to be in this physical form. If your physical body and you living in this life does not serve you, you would pop off and you would no longer be here. You're still here. You can hear me, which means you're supposed to be here in this physical form. So find a way to make the best and utilize that version of yourself as the tool that is meant to be, and then still work towards, evolve towards, remember this other version of yourself that is there. You just have to desire for it. You have to ask for an understanding, and it will start to show up in your experiences in your life. All right, so let me look through some questions really quickly to see if there's any questions about this, and then I gotta get to getting. Let's see. Personal readings, not doing that. Let's see. Okay, those are all personal readings. Not doing readings, people. Doing questions about the content of our study group. Can we heal ourselves with thoughts? Thoughts are, if I'm trying to create a piece of music, can I create music with one key on the piano? I can create a sound, I can create the beginning stage of something, but we really have to have a consistent rhythm going to produce music, or have something that's called music. So when we are trying to heal ourselves, if we are just trying to do so through thought, it's not enough. You have to utilize your thought. All right, give me 1 second, because I don't want this to... All right. I had to, because my thing's like, hey, like I'm really powerful. I'm like, sorry about it. Coming. Hold on. Forgot. Normally I have my phone flagged up, and I was like, I think I can make it through like both of the things today. So when we are trying to heal ourselves, we have to integrate our thoughts, our emotions, and our actions or reactions in this world. If you have used all of those components of your being, of who you are, and it's not healing, then it may mean one of two things. Either you do not understand what you're healing and you need to understand that a little bit more deeply and do some discovery work, or it's not something you're supposed to heal from. If I have been in an accident and my leg was chopped off, then I can't grow a new leg. It's just not going to happen, because the reality of this world is that I'm supposed to have no leg. So then I have to find a way to heal the beingness, the version of myself that has to move forward without this leg. I have to learn to live without it. And to some extent, some people are able to have, they're able to have a prosthetic, and that might help to make the transition easier. That might give them the opportunities that they were still desiring to have. But at the end of the day, the leg is still gone, and that is the reality of the situation. So there are some things that we are able to heal, that we're able to recover, but then there are some things that they're just not going to change, and they are what they are, no matter how hard we try to change it. If that's the case, then this means that it is a soul lesson for you, meaning that your experience of that condition is going to offer you opportunities to experience this world in a way that serves your soul and your higher purpose. And if you can just make peace with that and accept that and allow yourself to evolve into using your tool in that way to experience life, you will get what you're here for, and you will have happiness no matter whether you have the leg or not. I know it's easier said than done, but that's just the way it is. I'm just going back over here. Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate it. Michelle's like Michelle Falcon. She's like, Ferny, you are such an amazing person. She's just basically giving me props. So thank you. Appreciate it. Let's see. Or those people who live in their head in the spiritual world, but don't come downstairs and get grounded and experience the physical human aspects of life often enough. Yeah. So that's what I was talking about earlier. Exactly. Yeah, it's from A Course in Miracles, Megan. So we're reading A Course in Miracles, and I'm reading the complete and annotated edition, not the traditional edition that most people read, because I like the notes. Okay, so that's that. So let me go over here, and then I think it's got a little bit more time left. And then I'm already out of time, y'all, but I'm going to just power through real quickly because I want to make sure I get some of these questions. If you have questions about the material that we're talking about. You're asking for a personal reading not happening today. Yes, I think you do have to internalize your healing. How to start is the question. So Red Robin, so think of it this way. Don't make it bigger than it has to be, because sometimes people think that they have to have one big understanding or one big thing that just reveals itself, that will just be the beginning, that will be the link to everything you can heal in your life. Don't even go there, because what that's doing is that's creating this illusion that one thing has to happen for you to receive your healing, which is what I was talking about earlier, how people think they need to be married with a perfect guy to be happy, or this or that. It's the same thing in reverse. So what I would suggest is just, you can understand yourself more deeply just by being aware of what is happening within you, or what you're feeling, or what you're connecting with, what you're drawn to, what you feel inspired by. And actually journaling can help you through this, because you really have to process those thoughts and those internal processes through seeing it on paper, through understanding it on paper. Not only that, but we also have the help of each other, right? We're not here alone. We don't have to go through an evolution alone. I had many teachers in my life that gave me great lessons. I didn't just all of a sudden awaken and I knew all these things. I read books that I was drawn to. I had people come into my life who became friends, who were teachers for me as well. So look in those areas of your life and self-examine and journal, because that will help you to start to make some sense of it. Also, I would highly recommend that you try a regression, because if you do a hypnotic regression, it can take you to a deeper version of yourself that is a bit more connected, so you can start to make sense of what is happening within you and what you can do to really release some of the things that you're still holding on to. Okay? Yeah, Fontenot is like, it's amazing how much we just trust ourselves. Yeah, but I mean, we've been taught to distrust ourselves. We've been taught not to trust our intuition or not to trust our inner being, even though there's sometimes no explanation for why we feel the way we feel or why we react the way we react. T squared is like, healing is an inside job. Totally an inside job. Totally. Hey, hey girl. Lisa's on here. Life is precious and temporary. It is. And we get unending opportunities to come back over and over and over again to experience it. Let's see. You have such a beautiful... Oh, thank you, sweetheart. That's sweet. Enjoy the little things. We enjoy hanging with you too. Thank you, sweetheart. I appreciate that. This is happening to me as well. Same. Let's see. Hello. Can you tell me if that's personal reading? What a great conversation, Ferny. So glad I tuned in tonight. You have so much wisdom, Ferny. I love. Thank you. Thank you, sweetheart. Let's see. I think that might be... You talked about purchasing something to bring awareness. Is there a relationship to that with people who constantly accumulate things and stuff? Let me go back to that. You talked about purchasing something to bring awareness. Is there a relationship to that with people who constantly accumulate things? Yeah, that's what I was mentioning earlier. Sometimes I had a friend who... So I have a secret obsession. My obsession is buying books. I have a bad habit of buying a crap load of books, and it'll be a while before I get around to reading them. But for me, it's because of the knowledge they hold. And so that's my obsession. But I know people, and I had a friend who used to collect anything and everything that was spiritually associated. Oh, it was a crystal, I want it. It's a beads, I want it. If it's a prayer mandala, I want it. Like, they would collect everything and everything because they were placing their spiritual capacity and awareness with the things that they accumulated. So they became spiritual hoarders. And a lot of people are spiritual hoarders in the spiritual community. They continue to buy the newest crystal, the newest card deck, the newest affirmation deck. They will click on the newest meme. That's what I'm talking about. If I just click on all these memes that say I'm going to have a miracle tomorrow, then I'm going to awake, I'm going to get more woke. No, because that's not true spirituality. That is simply you that is replacing one thing with another. You're still placing the full understanding of things outside of yourself. You're not going within. And that's what I'm talking about. I don't do hypnotic regressions. I used to do Reiki, but I don't do hypnotic regressions. I do have a really great teacher, a regressionist that I actually go to. Her name is Suvani. You can probably find her online. It's Suvani Yoga. Yeah, SuvaniYoga.com. SUVANI yoga.com. She's incredible. There's also, if you're in Houston, there's a woman named Melanie Harrell who's also a hypnotic regressionist. And I've had her as well. So she was really, really good. How does someone have a hypnotic regression for? It's pretty much like being put into a very subtle state of hypnosis. And people think, oh, I'm going to have all these like experiences and I'm going to like not remember. No. Like when you're in hypnotic regression, you're just going into a very deep, relaxed state. And then you're starting to like, share whatever's being asked of you. And you said, does everything that happens happen for a reason, or just go with it? Or do we have to find an answer or many answers? Everything does happen for a reason, but everything that exists, everything that occurs offers an opportunity for us. Every single thing. Even the things that we accidentally do for ourselves or in our lives, same thing. Doesn't matter. Everything serves a purpose and expands creation and allows us to experience creation. And that's the basic premise for everything. We just don't understand it because we're stuck in our physical human bodies and we're stuck on like the thing that's right in front of us that's causing us to be unhappy. And so we get fixated and focused on that. I'm actually... the Dear Fernies for this week are going to be really interesting because I address that in one way. I talk about a woman wrote and said she's losing faith in God and she doesn't know what else to do, and that she doesn't feel, she doesn't know what to do because she's lost her faith in God because of all the bad things she's gone through. And I actually go through it in detail and talk about, well, it's not because, God isn't there for you. It's because your understanding of God is completely upside down and you've been conditioned into these ideas that when you were a child made sense to you at the time, but that's not the reality and you're misunderstanding your relationship with God. So I go into it in great detail and then I'll talk about some other things as well, but check it out. All right, guys, I love you all. I will see you Friday for our other study group with Conversations with God. Okay. Love y'all. Have a good night.